Modern Love, the podcast, is supported by...
Produced by the iLab at WBUR, Boston.
From the New York Times and WBUR Boston, this is Modern Love. Stories of love, loss, and redemption. I'm your host, Meghna Chakrabarty. Forgiveness. It's always easier said than done. What's even harder is finding a way to relate to someone who's hurt you, to see them as just another imperfect human being. Benjamin Hertwig learned this at a difficult time in his life. Lance Reddick reads his story. He's best known as Lieutenant Cedric Daniels in HBO's The Wire. Here's Lance with Benjamin's essay, In the Waiting Room of Estranged Spouses.
I Googled counseling and scrolled through pages of possibilities before finally settling on a female psychologist with a kind face. Later that week, I went to her office wanting to talk about fidelity and broken trust, but somehow ended up talking about sex and guilt. I cried a lot. 8 years earlier, when I was 20, I had served in Afghanistan as a machine gunner in a security platoon that accompanied convoys. A 6-month tour of grinding tedium interspersed with episodes of unpredictable violence and death. But that's not what drove me to the psychologist's office. I went because my marriage had fallen apart. My wife had had an affair. As is often the case in marriage, the infidelity was more a symptom of our trouble than its cause. Their situation was typical. They met through work. One evening, before I knew what was happening, the three of us were at the same fundraising event, and at one point, he and my wife ducked outside for a smoke, and I was left alone. Well, not entirely alone. His wife was there too, holding a newborn, looking uncomfortable. We didn't talk. Someone was making a speech about future goals, and I was eating dessert. After the affair came to light, my wife and I separated. I missed the cat. When I wasn't feeling self-righteously angry, I missed my wife too. In the evenings, I listened to Springsteen, ordered pizza, watched hockey, slept poorly, and spent the gray hours before dawn Googling my wife's name, the guy's name, and the pain of divorce. One night, the first link told me to pray to God. The second told me to prepare for a new life with many beautiful women. And the third led me to a body hair removal site. I decided to go for counseling. A few months later, I was in the psychologist's reception room paying for my fourth really good cry when a woman carrying a child walked in. I didn't recognize her at first, and then I remembered her face from the fundraiser. "Are you the wife of the guy my wife is having an affair with?" I asked tactlessly. The question is a stupid one. First off, it's stupid. Second, it assumes that this woman's identity, like mine, is wrapped up in fidelity and infidelity and everything between. It assumes that her skin, like mine, feels like the translucent noodle paper of a tie wrap that holds in the lettuce and the shrimp, the peanut sauce, and the pain. "Yeah," she said, "but we're not together anymore." "I'm Catherine." The receptionist rushed out and returned with the psychologist. "Is everything okay?" the psychologist asked as she walked in. We looked at her, and that's when she understood what was going on. "Oh my God," she whispered, her worlds colliding. In fairness, the chances of Catherine and me meeting in this fashion were extremely low. She and I had never spoken before. We both worked full-time and lived on opposite ends of a large city, We both searched the internet for counselors and somehow decided on the same psychologist and arranged to meet her on the same day in consecutive hours. The receptionist was still shaking her head. "Oh my God," the psychologist whispered again. Later, Catherine and I went to a breezy cafe and talked about our estranged spouses, the circumstances that had brought us here. Catherine's son bumped away on her knee. She asked if I'd like to hold him. I reached my hands out. He smelled clean and abundant and wonderful. And he didn't care who I was or what started happening when or why it all began. For a time, my questions and fear and anger resolved into this child sitting on my lap. Then he started to cry. And Catherine took him back, cradling him in her forearm and pulling her jacket over her upper body and his. I was attracted to her strength, maybe to her as well. I wondered if she was attracted to me, but the question was irrelevant. Neither of us knew what to do with love right then. I asked her if she wanted to get married again. "At some point, I think," she said. "How about you?" "Probably sometime down the road," I said. "I'm glad we met," she said. By early winter, my final day as an inner-city housing worker had arrived, and I was told to go buy a cake for my farewell party later that afternoon. I walked under the bright lights of the supermarket and stared at the walls of food. When I returned from Afghanistan, I hated supermarkets. Like the soldier Jeremy Renner plays in The Hurt Locker, who returns from war only to feel overwhelmed by too many choices and too much freedom. I felt paralyzed by possibilities. I wanted to go back to the cafeteria and decisions made for me. So I limited the possibilities and got married. I settled on a giant carrot cake. It had fist-sized rosettes of pink and blue icing and weighed almost as much as Catherine's son. I paid for my food, grasped the oversized cake in both hands, and headed for the exit, where I somehow ended up a few feet away from my ex-wife's lover. I hadn't seen him since the fundraiser. He had been in my dreams, though. In one dream, I was knocking at the door of my childhood home when he opened it and just stood there, handsome, shirtless, confident, everything I was not. I was crying when I awoke, alone in a new apartment and newly divorced. He was in my dreams the same way the suicide bomber was in my dreams the year after I came back from Afghanistan. I couldn't always see him, but I felt his presence at the edges of consciousness, pushing me somewhere I didn't want to go, forcing me toward the inevitable conclusion. Dreams, like the slow burn of a forest fire, where the roots under the earth smolder and stretch in 100 different directions. I spent a lot of time thinking about the ways I wanted my ex-wife and her lover to feel that burn. I thought I hated them. Later on, some friends proclaimed that a giant carrot cake in his face in the supermarket line would have been a fitting conclusion to the story. But I didn't even consider the option. I just stood there with the cake in my hand, feeling ridiculous. He looked tired. Maybe he had custody of his son right then. Maybe he had been up all night taking care of him. "Do you want to go for a beer sometime and talk about it?" he asked. "No, I don't want to go for a beer to talk about it," I said, which was petulant and true. "But I forgive you," I added, which was supercilious and false. "Okay," he said, still looking tired. I couldn't summon any real anger. He was just a young boy's tired father. He wasn't even unkind. I walked out holding the cake, feeling happy I hadn't burst into tears or tried to fight. I should have left it there. But in one of the mood swings that seems characteristic of my post-divorce anxiety, I sent my ex a text saying how I couldn't believe she had left me for him. She didn't respond, and I wasn't proud of myself. We stopped texting. Rather, I stopped sending stupid texts. I slowly continued to heal. In the months that followed, thinking of my ex-wife's lover as that sweet boy's father was somehow very helpful for me. I had held Catherine's boy, felt the good weight of his body, and eventually I learned that it's hard to hate a person when that person was a part of bringing something good into the world. Her boy is much bigger now, a beautiful child. I see his photos on Facebook and sometimes like them. Catherine and I haven't spoken in a while, and that's okay. I don't know what has happened to my ex-wife and Catherine's husband, and that's okay too. There's enough pain in the world, and I don't wish it on them anymore. Some days, I wish I had taken up Catherine's ex on his offer of a beer that afternoon, been kinder to my ex-wife, opened myself up to those possibilities a bit more. I remain grateful for the opportunity of meeting Catherine, and I would like to meet her son again when he is older. A coffee shop, a supermarket line, or a psychologist's waiting room all seem like good places for such a meeting. I wouldn't explain the situation. That wouldn't be fair. I would probably just smile and mumble, "You helped me through a tough time when you were young." Then I would walk away, trusting in the possibilities.
Lance Reddick reading Benjamin Hertwig's essay In the Waiting Room of Estranged Spouses. We'll hear how Benjamin's doing today after the break. We're back. It's Modern Love, the podcast. I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. And now a postscript from the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times, Daniel Jones, and the author of this week's essay, Benjamin Hertwig.
I first started writing when I returned from Afghanistan. I was having a number of nightmares at the time, and a friend suggested I try writing about it, which I did, and the nightmares went away. So after I found out about the affair, I just found that I again had this very strong impulse to write, and I think that writing is a way for people to acknowledge and confront some of the traumas they have experienced, and a way for them to move forward in a healthy way. My ex-wife and I are not in contact right now, and I'm not sure if she's still together with Catherine's ex-husband either, but I guess I've just tried to remove myself from the situation and focus on moving forward in my writing, and I'm not sure what the future holds, but that's where we're at right now.
I love Benjamin Hertwig's essay, and I loved it from the first moment I read it. His essay is really an exploration of how corrosive self-pity and blame can be in your life when things aren't going your way, and also how liberating forgiveness can be. But how do you get to that place? How do you get from feeling sorry for yourself and blaming others to a place where you forgive people who you think have done you wrong, or just that life has sort of thrown curveballs at you one after another? And I thought it was just a remarkable testament to the power of that forgiveness, and how he takes the reader through that process of arriving at a state of forgiveness. You know, at several points here, he talks about just acting stupidly and acting out of his worst impulses. And, you know, it really takes recognizing that to go beyond it and to get yourself into a better place. And this is a situation, honestly, that so many people have been through. It doesn't have to be even cheating in a marriage. It can be any kind of relationship where you are deceived and betrayed and you feel like it's all the other person's fault. And it just takes you to a very dark place. And he takes this essay to a very light place. And that's just such an extraordinary achievement.
When Dan Jones told me that Lance Reddick was going to read the piece, I think that's one of the reasons why I was so excited about it, because The Wire was almost this baptism into complexity for me, and just recognizing that there are a number of different ways that people deal with situations, and I don't know what it is like to be that other person. So even if I am at times or was angry with my ex-wife or angry with the man that she was with, recognizing that the situation is sort of bigger than my conception of it. And I think relating to that in my writing, something that I've tried to do and hopefully will continue to do.
Having his essay published in Modern Love motivated Benjamin to pursue writing professionally. He starts his PhD at the University of British Columbia later this summer, and he has something else to be excited about. He's found love again.
It'll be almost 2 years in August that we've been dating now. And she's a graphic designer and writer, and she's my best editor and gives me lots of great feedback.
And Benjamin is still in touch with Catherine, the ex-wife of his ex-wife's lover. He got to hold her son again when they met for coffee earlier this year, right before his piece was published. So for Benjamin, moving on isn't about trying to forget the chapters that make up his past. It's figuring out how to write them down.
Sometimes it does feel like I've lived a number of different lives. As a soldier, as a married man, as a tree planter, working in the inner city, now living here in Vancouver. But I think writing really allows me to examine those different, very disparate parts of my life and try and make sense of them.
Benjamin Hertwig, author of In the Waiting Room of Estranged Spouses. We also heard from Modern Love editor Dan Jones. More in a minute. Special thanks to Lance Reddick for reading this week's essay. You can see him in the Amazon series Bosch. Next week, Amy Landecker.
We were asked to stand and face each other. And then my ex-husband was asked to look into my eyes and repeat some phrases that meant basically, with this document, I release you. And we stood there, just as we had on our wedding day. He looked even more handsome and grown up and happy. And I thought about why he married me in the first place. Yes, he loved me, but also he was probably afraid he would never be able to have a family if he didn't marry a woman.
Modern Love is a production of the New York Times and WBUR, Boston's NPR station. It's produced, directed, and edited by Jessica Alpert, John Perotti, Caitlin O'Keefe, and Amory Sievertson. The idea for the Modern Love podcast was conceived by Lisa Tobin. Iris Adler is our executive producer. Daniel Jones is the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times and advisor to the show. Music for the podcast, courtesy of APM. I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. See you next week.